Good afternoon once again, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you're all enjoying your main course. I know some of you will have only just received it, so please continue, and we will continue with our program for our lunch event this afternoon. As we move now to our guest speaker, who's going to join me up on stage in just a moment. Before I invite him up though, just a quick mention about Slido. I'm sure many of you have used it and are familiar. The easiest way to access our Slido session this afternoon is just to point your camera at the QR code, which is up on the screen. If you want to go old school style and put in the web address, it's slido.com, and then the code you need to put in is 24OCT for October, and feel free to submit a question, and time permitting, we will get to as many of those questions as we possibly can. To our guest speaker now this afternoon, Jake Klein, the founder and executive chair at Evolution Mining, a company that was formed back in October of 2011 with a growth strategy mindset focused on M&A, and it's resulted in Evolution today being the ASX's second largest gold miner and one of the world's lowest cost, high margin gold producers. Their assets include Cowal and North Parks, an 80% share there in New South Wales, Ernest Henry and Mount Rawdon in Queensland, Wangari in WA, and Red Lake in Canada. Prior to Evolution, Jake was the president and CEO of Sino Gold Mining Limited, where he managed its development into an ASX 100 company, and the largest foreign participant in the Chinese gold industry. Sino was purchased by Eldorado Group in late 2009 for $2.2 billion. Prior to Sino Gold, Jake was employed at Macquarie Bank and PwC. So plenty of stories to share with us this afternoon. Would you please welcome our guest speaker for today, Jake Klein.
Thanks, Tim. Good afternoon, everyone. Wow. What a mining club you've got. Unbelievable. I'm genuinely honoured and privileged to be your speaker today. This is the second time I'm speaking at your club. The last time was in 2017, a couple of years after we acquired the Wangari operation, and that time was at the Hyatt and to a much, much smaller audience. So this was not what I was expecting today, but well done. I did note Rob's comment about high caliber of speakers, so I hope I just don't disappoint today. I do want to start by reflecting on how fortunate we all are to be living in the lucky country of Australia at what is an incredibly prosperous time. Over the last 30 years, Australia has built off the previous generation's hard work to become a fantastically wealthy country. By way of example, when I first started working in the mining industry 30 years ago, and China emerged as Australia's largest customer, the iron ore price was around $25 a tonne, and we are selling roughly 120 million tonnes a year. Today, the iron ore price is around $100 a tonne, and we sell close to 1 billion tonnes a year. In revenue terms, that is a phenomenal 33 times higher, providing enormous flow and benefits to all stakeholders, including the state of Western Australia and the federal government. Likewise, our third largest mineral export, and one which I'm especially interested in, gold, has increased from $380 an ounce to today's price of $2,700 an ounce, or 4,000 Australian dollars an ounce, which is about 7 times higher. The reality, ladies and gentlemen, is that mining has made all Australians prosperous, not just miners and the communities around them. Over the last decade, the mining industry has delivered the federal government one tax windfall after another, totaling a staggering $365 billion. Each surge of national income from mining booms has underpinned our housing and superannuation wealth and kept Australians near the very top of global rankings on a GDP per capita basis. The success is best demonstrated right here in Perth, where dining out is comparable to, or if not better than, London or New York. And last December, I travelled with my wife and friends, enjoying Rottnest Island, Margaret River and Esperance, and everything about our experience was undoubtedly world-class. But friends and colleagues, as we all know from completing an induction before entering an underground mine, stench gas will be released in the case of an emergency. So I'm afraid I'm here today to discharge the stench gas. So apologies for the terrible smell and analogy. But I really think we are at a crossroads where inaction is going to cost us. As Al Gore, the former Vice President of the United States, famously said in his award-winning documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, future generations may well have occasion to ask themselves, what were our parents thinking? Why didn't they wake up when they had a chance? And today I'd like to use my talk to highlight 3 inconvenient truths Australia faces, which may well have future generations asking this question of us. We have the chance to course correct, but I believe time is running out. So let me try and explain. There is a common thread that has landed us in this predicament, and something I think we should all be deeply concerned about. It seems that we here in Australia, and in fact probably in all Western democracies, appear to have lost our ability to think and act strategically. Rather, everything we do seems to be tactical with only a short-term horizon. In Australia, maybe it is because of our short election cycle, but I am really concerned that we seem to be unable to have mature, calm, adult conversations about long-term important issues which will not only affect us, but will affect our children and our grandchildren. The first inconvenient truth I believe we need to confront is that globalization is essentially over and the world has effectively decoupled. This is a sad outcome and one that I am very reluctant to acknowledge, but I think it is true. And accepting this has enormous ramifications that we must think through carefully. Namely, that we are now effectively in long-term strategic competition with China, a country that has been the biggest driver of our economic prosperity over the last 30 years. I do feel well qualified to talk about this, as I was very fortunate to make my first visit to China in 1994, marking the start of a 15-year involvement when I had the amazing experience of building 3 gold mines in remote parts of China, making Sino Gold initially the first and then the largest foreign gold participant in that country. This was during an unprecedented period of globalization when everyone, or certainly foreigners visiting China, believed that China would seamlessly integrate into our Western democratic view of the world. I will never forget at our first joint venture meetings with our Chinese partner, where the fog of cigarette smoke was heavy in the air. My counterpart was using an abacus during the negotiations. At that time, every mining operation and smelter was owned by the state. Safety standards were extremely poor, and mines were incredibly small. Whilst China at the time was the world's largest gold producer, the average size of a gold mine was only 16,000 ounces of gold a year. Fast forward 30 years to today, and China has not integrated into our Western democratic world. Globalization is essentially over, and China is very close to becoming the world's largest economy. Amongst the many, many things it has achieved during this time, the one that is most relevant to this conversation is that it has built some of the most formidable and successful resource companies in the world. Companies like Zijin, Jiaojin Gold, Shandong Gold, Jiangxi Copper and MMG all started as state-owned enterprises. Today they are listed companies with market capitalizations in the tens of billions of dollars and are genuine global companies. They have access to cheap capital, they have ambitious expansion plans, and they enjoy very, very strong government supports. Zijin today has a market capitalization of $67 billion US, and this chart you're seeing on the screen shows clearly how its share price has outperformed its Western peers over the last decade. If you want further proof, have a look at these charts, which show China's growing share of global copper production and its absolute dominance in battery manufacturing. Nickel production is another area where we have been completely outmaneuvered and outplayed. Cheap power and cheap labor in Indonesia, coupled with Chinese processing technology and investment, has decimated our domestic nickel industry. I really believe that the key difference is that China has been able to think and act strategically, and unless we can shift from tactical, short-term decision-making, I'm afraid we will consistently be on the losing side. If we accept that we need to build and invest in separate supply chains for mineral security, a decision we seem to have already made, we must acknowledge that this will come at significant cost. This is largely because the last 30 years have shown us the benefits of a globalized economy where so much has been processed and manufactured in China. If going forward this is no longer available and we need to produce our strategic and critical minerals and materials outside of China, we need to recognize and respond to this new paradigm. So this is a good segue into the second inconvenient truth. As I said in my opening remarks, mining has made Australia wealthy, but the reality is that our resources won't last forever. It is becoming increasingly expensive to discover, mine, and process minerals in Australia, and this price tag is only set to increase over the next decades. It is therefore imperative that we lay the groundwork today to ensure that we stay ahead of the pack and remain globally competitive and innovative. I've often made the point that Australia is God's gift to miners, a vast, underpopulated, geologically prospective country that is a great place to mine. But we have the opportunity, and in fact, I would argue the obligation, to make it even greater. The recent federal government decision to effectively overturn the New South Wales government decision to approve the development of Regis's McPhillamys mine is a great example of what we should not be doing. New South Wales has one of the most rigorous and thorough approval processes in the world. This project went through years of extensive scrutiny, including public consultation by the Independent Planning Commission before its approval by the New South Wales government. We cannot have a repeat of this, and there needs to be a change in the legislative process that ensures that any red flags at a state or federal level that risk a project's approval are identified and dealt with early. To have them emerge at the end of a process after millions of dollars has been invested is unacceptable and unnecessarily tarnishes the attractiveness of Australia as a mining destination. Yes, we have abundant resources and are world-class miners, but we do also have the potential to extend this and become the world epicenter of excellence for value-adding these products. Why are we okay to do only the mining while we send these scarce and valuable materials offshore to be processed? To me, this represents considerable value leakage to Australia. Likewise, why do we want to try and manufacture solar panels here when others can do it cheaper and probably better? Wouldn't we be much better off investing in the downstream part and technology side of the mining value chain? It is true that at current pricing of these commodities, these projects may not attract private capital today. But if we are committed to building supply chains that don't include China, prices in time will rise, and we need government policy and incentives now that motivates private and government capital to invest for the long term. This requires long-term strategic policy frameworks, note the words long-term and strategic, that needs to be developed and committed to with bipartisan support and are not re-prosecuted every time there is a change in government. We should be relying on subject matter experts and think tanks to collaboratively guide us to the optimal outcomes for the whole nation, rather than the most expedient, short-term, vote-winning political solutions. I'm really passionate about our need to profile our industry in a better light so that we attract and retain the best and brightest to our industry. We all know that this is fundamental to our future. Part of this is convincing all Australians of the importance of the resource industry to our country and for the green energy future everyone seems committed to, which simply won't happen without these metals. We are a relatively small employer with only 2% of the workforce employed in our sector, but we would not be where we are today as a country without our industry, and we need to do more to educate people about this. As an example, the great initiatives like the one developed by this mining club that provides a free camp for high school students to get a first-hand look at what the mining industry has to offer should be expanded and extended nationally. So I want to now shift to the third inconvenient truth, and this is another where I feel I've had recent direct experience, because we need to have a mature conversation that if we want green power and to be at net zero by 2050, we're going to have to invest tens and tens of billions of dollars. That does not mean we shouldn't do it, but it does mean we should all agree and be transparent about who and how it is going to be paid for. The cost of getting this wrong is just too significant. In a recent paper published by the McKinsey Global Institute, that they state that under any energy transition scenario, it requires a power system in 2050 that has about 5 times more gigawatts installed than today's power system. This excludes the expensive and difficult part, which is firming or storage, and is required when the sun is not shining or the wind is not blowing. Delivering this green power is a nation-building project and should be treated as such. We're talking about replacing an important piece of national infrastructure. At present, though, we have a federal government target, but its delivery is dependent on each state independently delivering its part of it. And to complicate matters even more, each state has its own targets. This just is not a recipe for success. But with the right policy setting and commitment, transitioning our grid to green energy is possible. In fact, evolution holds an important component of the solution for Queensland. Over the last 4 years, in partnership with renewable energy experts, ICA Partners, we have spent around $25 million completing a feasibility study to assess the conversion of our Mount Rawdon operation into a $7 billion plus pumped hydro energy storage project. The project has a life of 80 years and the potential to generate up to 20 gigawatt hours every single day, which is enough to power some 2 million homes. The feasibility study is now complete and unequivocally demonstrates that Mount Rawdon is the most advanced and cost-efficient pumped hydro project in Australia. So getting back to the inconvenient truth, who's going to pay for projects like Mount Rawdon and the many others that need to be built? To me, it seems that there are really only 2 options. Either the government owns or lends money to a project like this and finds the money on its balance sheet today, or it guarantees offtake at a higher future power price. It's hard to see how it works any other way. A green grid is a nation-building project and will be expensive. But like national endeavours of this nature that our country has tackled before, it needs a federal government strategic plan that is endorsed and agreed by the states as to how it will be collectively funded and implemented, not just long-dated targets. I do want to use the last few minutes of my formal remarks to remind you who Evolution is, and if you're an ambitious, talented individual in this audience, and I know there are many here today, encourage you to consider Evolution in your future career plans. 10 years ago, Evolution had a market capitalisation of around $400 million, less than 5% of our market cap today, which is around $10 billion. At that time, our average mine life was about 7 years, and we were producing about 440,000 ounces of relatively high-cost gold. Since then, we have grown into the second largest ASX-listed gold producer. We have 33 million ounces of gold and 4.1 million tonnes of copper in resources. The midpoint of our guidance for FY25 is 750,000 ounces at a sector-leading all-in sustaining cost of $1,525 an ounce, and our average mine life has grown out to at least 18 years. Two critical differentiators for Evolution are our significant exposure to copper. We've added about 75,000 tonnes of annual production each year, and accounts for about 30% of our revenue and our very, very long mine lives. From 2011, from the very start of Evolution, we have had a presence here in Western Australia. An important part of our corporate strategy is to only operate in Tier 1 jurisdictions and in world-class geological belts, and Western Australia clearly ticks both of those boxes. We started here in Western Australia with Edna May, which we sold to Ramelius, and we acquired our Mungari operation in 2015. Later that year, we increased our commitment by acquiring a large land package contiguous to our Mungari operation when we bought Phoenix Resources. And in 2021, we acquired the Kundana and East Kundana joint venture properties from Northern Star. With our ground position now consolidated to approximately 1,000 square kilometres over some of the best geology in the Kalgoorlie region, we are now investing $250 million to double our plant capacity to 4.2 million tonnes per annum. This project is currently on budget and slightly ahead of schedule to be complete, and it will be completed in early 2026, transforming Mungari into a 200,000 ounce a year operation with a mine life of at least 15 years. In the 12 months ending June 2024, Evolution was able to deliver a record financial performance, reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 12% against our 2020 baseline, contribute $2.7 billion to the Australian and Canadian economies, and $419 million to local and regional businesses around our mine sites, and also importantly deliver our 23rd consecutive dividend to shareholders. At Evolution, we do aspire to create an environment where all of our 5,800 employees and contractors go home better than how they arrive, where people are healthy and safe, where they have a voice and can contribute at work, at home, and in the community. One of the programs I am most proud of is our graduate program. For the last 11 years, we've been hiring talented young people to journey with us on a 2-year graduate program that exposes them to different areas of our business and supports the development of their personal, technical, and commercial skills. The success we have had is amazing, with many of these talented young people now in senior positions across our company. However, we do have more work to do in attracting and retaining women to our business, with 19% female representation against our target of 22%. Encouragingly, our intake of female graduates continues to increase, with females making up 25% of our 2024 graduate cohorts. In summary, Evolution has never been better positioned to benefit from the very favourable markets we find ourselves in. Gold and copper prices are high, and there is a good reason to believe they'll go even higher. Our September quarterly report, which we released last week, showed that we've got off to a very good start this financial year, producing 194,000 ounces of very low-cost gold at an all-in sustaining cost of $1,569 an ounce. We do also recognise that as a company we are on a journey. We started from humble beginnings, and that's something we'll never forget as we try continuing to implement our vision of inspired people creating a premier gold company. I do want to conclude my talk today by laying out some potential solutions to the 3 inconvenient truths I raised, which will hopefully stimulate some further discussion and debate. I do believe that the time is now. It is later than we think, but it's not too late. We need to take on the challenge to future-proof and grow our industry for the next 50 years. This requires us to do things differently because the world has changed, and this requires a different approach from us. To me, this starts with an aligned federal and state government policy that incentivizes us to become global leaders, not only as miners, but in every part of the value chain. This includes processing, environmental science, safety, technology, green energy, and education. It also means we should set ourselves up to become the center for capital raising for the global resources industry, where companies across the globe raise funds in Australia because we have the best and most efficient equity and debt market for our sector. We need to ensure that we always have a world-class regulatory process, a competitive tax and royalty regime, cheap, reliable, and preferably green power, a growing, motivated talent pool, and strong, consistent, and reliable government supports. We need vision and commitment to ensure that when young people in the tech space aspire to develop the next breakthrough technology, they think of mining first. When young people are deciding their career paths, they need to be attracted to our industry because they know they will get a world-class education which will lead to an exciting, lucrative, and all-round rewarding career. And finally, we need to be showcasing all the great things our industry does so that all Australians understand its importance to not only our future, but to theirs too. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Jake. Can everyone hear me okay? I understand there's been a little technical issue with the QR code for the Slido session this afternoon. We're endeavouring to put up the revised QR code, that's the new one. So if you're wanting to submit a question, repeat the process. Point your phone at the QR code or use the code if you want to do it the old way, OCTL. 24, and I'll keep an eye on the questions coming in, and hopefully, time permitting, we'll get to a few of those. Jake, thank you. A phenomenal success story, the evolution story. You've obviously got a strong M&A mindset, have had since the very beginning, but to turn it into what it is today is phenomenal. What's your secret?
That's a good question. There is no secret other than to recognise that the industry is counter-cyclical, or very cyclical, so to do things in a counter-cyclical way. So we've been asked a lot about M&A now in the current gold price environment when it's $4,000 an ounce. There's a time for doing deals and there's a time for making money in the sector, and this is a time for making money. We've always had a very clear strategy, and I should acknowledge Tommy McKeith, he has been involved from the beginning as a director, and Fiona Hick, who's just joined our board. But board clarity on the strategy that we always want to improve the quality of our portfolio, but only do things that are accretive to our shareholders. So that's been what we've done. We've looked for deals and opportunities where there's geological upside, and Glenn Masterman, our head of discovery, is here, and he's made some outstanding calls with respect to geological upside. You want to be in good geological areas. You ideally have a motivated seller. We've had Glencore as a motivated seller. We've had Barrick, who decided to exit Australia. Glencore needed to raise money. So to do things which require courage and conviction and are consistent with our strategy.
You talked a lot about this sense of the ticking clock, and we've only got a limited period of time to get things right, to focus on the big picture, to look ahead, to take a bipartisan approach to forward-thinking policy. How long have we got to get that right before we do irreparable damage?
I think we sold Sinogold because my Chinese colleague said that Xi Jinping was coming into power, had become the president of China, and that things were likely to shift in China to a more nationalistic approach. So we're already 14 years, 15 years late. You've seen the relationship deteriorate with China over that 15 years. So I think we've still got time, but we need to start acting now, and we need to get bipartisan support for how we're going to tackle this.
You talked a little bit about energy transition there. I mean, with a federal election on the horizon, I think it goes without saying it is the most decisive and yet divisive issue in the upcoming federal election. What gives you hope that we're suddenly going to take a bipartisan approach to things like energy transition?
I think we have to. I mean, if you look at the energy transition, so the federal government has a target of 43% by 2030. New South Wales has a target of 50% by 2030. Queensland, I think, has a target of 75 or 80% by 2035. Snowy Hydro is taking a decade to build. It started with a $2 billion cost estimate, capital cost estimate. It's likely to cost somewhere in the order of $15 billion. These projects need to be being built now, and we need to have experts advising us as to what the right mix is. Both that it needs to be a national system, and we can't have it becoming a political issue because it's in our national interests.
Which is hard to do, isn't it? Because in an ideal world, you take politics out of everything, but it's not the reality, is it? I mean, as I say, it is going to be such a big part of this federal election campaign. Not that we want to get political here today, and we are an apolitical organisation, theoretically, but where do you stand on it?
Well, I think we need to make bold decisions, and we need to make bold decisions based on expert advice. So if you think about the way politics has evolved, it seems that every sort of big issue then becomes a political issue. You have to go back to things which made a real difference to our nation. In the 90s, when Keating and Hawke deregulated it, the financial system, that had sustained economic success for Australia and laid the foundations. The Howard government made significant and substantial, bold decisions that changed the outlook for China, for Australia, not only over a 3-year period to the next election, but over a 25-year period. We need some leaders who are prepared to take that sort of a view and then sell it to us.
Absolutely. You talked as well about the threat of Indonesia and China competing with our commodity markets here. How do we tackle those, even with the most agreed upon bipartisan approach? Given their operating costs and other advantages they might have, how are we going to compete with that?
I think we need to recognise that we're in a very competitive situation. I mean, I'm going to embarrass Tommy over here because he was an early stage investor in Sino Gold and a cornerstone investor when we listed in 2002. He is also a cornerstone investor in Zijin. He worked for Goldfields at the time. But the reality is that their 10% stake that Goldfields subsequently sold would be worth more today than Goldfields in totality is worth. So we are up against formidable competition, and the more we keep talking to each other about small issues over here, the more China and its strategic approach to things is just going to eat our breakfast.
Yeah. Can we talk about you personally? How would you describe your leadership style?
It depends who you ask. If you ask my family, and particularly my wife, she'd say difficult to take personal criticism. Maybe some of the board would say that as well. Look, I think that, you need a vision. We've been fortunate to say when we shifted, we started Evolution, out of a small office with a vision that things were shifting from China. Everyone seemed to be exiting Australia at the time. So we said, well, there are no mid-tier companies in Australia, so let's try and build one. There was I hope, a humility about it. There still is, hopefully. We're trying to build a culture, and this is genuine, and I hope it's reflected in the organisation, that everyone thinks that they have a say, that people have an opportunity to speak up, that they act and feel like owners. I get allergic reactions when I hear systems and process. We want to be a people-oriented company.
You studied in Cape Town.
Yeah.
You're a commerce student with an eye to becoming one day an investment banker. At what point did you think, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be a gold miner?
I am the biggest accidental miner possible. Because as you say, I wanted to be an investment banker. I came here in 1991 with a backpack and $1,000. And my girlfriend at the time has now become my wife of some 30 years. I got a job at Macquarie Bank. Bullion division was making a heap of money at the time. And one thing led to another, and we went on a trip to China. So this was a small group of Macquarie bankers, 3 or 4 of us who knew nothing about China or mining, and believed that we could build mines in remote parts of China. So it was a real accident. And
you've been on a steep learning curve ever since.
Once mining gets in your blood, it infects you for life.
Yeah. And in terms of your style and who you take inspiration from, you know, just levelling it down to a sporting analogy here, you grew up a Springboks fan.
I did.
You've adopted the Wallabies, but in terms of your pursuit of excellence, you look to the All Blacks.
Yes,
Is that fair to say?
I did, yeah. I mean, I did come here, and John knows the story. I did support his team, and I still do. But yeah,
He's a very large man sitting in the front row, so I think you're playing it well.
I did come here in 1991. South Africa hadn't played as a Springbok team since 1980, I don't think.
Yep.
And Australia won the World Cup, and this was like, wow, this is a good place to be,
Yeah.
world champion. But I do admire the way the All Blacks, certainly up until a couple of years ago, and I think the Springboks have frankly taken that mantle of building a culture,
Yep.
you know, that whole methodology and ethos of leaving the jersey in a better place, relying on your team player to do what they're expected to do. Those are really good lessons for a corporate culture.
Yep.
You know, how many times do people just want to be respected and be able to get their space to do their job well?
Yep.
I think Macquarie, to be fair, you know, has been one of the incredible success stories of Australia. 30 years ago, for stock price was $5, it's now 200, and they've been able to evolve and develop themselves into different businesses, but they've always had kind of a core culture and values, but not process that determined what businesses they would go into. So you know, those are some of the things.
Yeah. Getting questions thick and fast from the audience here, so I'll get to some of those. The most endorsed question is about the upcoming US election, how that might affect Australia's path to net zero and the ripple effects it might have on the mining sector here, I suppose, particularly in light of what you were saying about the dynamic around China and how that's changed over the last 20 odd years.
I asked you that question, who was going to win this election. My
question.
brother was out here from the US a week ago. He lives in Miami and was from New York. He thinks it's a 50-50
Yep.
call. So it depends on the last couple of weeks. I think the implications are massive.
Yeah. Well, let's entertain then a Trump winning scenario.
Yeah.
Because that's, I suppose, the one that is going to create more of a ripple effect around the world. What would that do to our relationship with China, to the way we might pursue the energy transition?
I think it's unpredictable because he's
Yeah.
so unpredictable. So we'll have to wait and see what he says.
Yeah.
Because according to him, he's going to solve all the world's problems.
Yeah.
So
Look
it's all going
forward
to be
to
good.
Australia remaining competitive as a mining jurisdiction with our slow regulatory processes and higher costs compared to other countries. How do you see that? How do you see where we're at the moment and prospects for improvement there?
So I think the process is okay. I mean, you know, the number of times I used to have sleepless nights when we had assets in China that we're going to wake up and we didn't own the asset. You don't have that in Australia. So once you go through the process, yes, it can be streamlined. Yes, it can be better, but the process works, and this is a great mining jurisdiction. I think what I'd say is, if you're thinking about kind of 10 to 20 years ahead, can we imagine a different future? I mean, is there a way in which technology can really change the way we think about how we do things in the sector? I think there is. So if you had a combination of cheap power somehow and technology, and you thought about automating things in a way that we're not thinking about it now, can Australia actually redefine what it is competitive at? And I think the answer is yes, if we think long-term enough and if we committed to it enough to do it properly. I mean, another small thing is, to me, it's absurd that there are less places at universities today for geologists, geoscientists, mining engineers than there were a decade ago. Like, that is not a country that is trying to define itself with mining as its future.
We can't rely on wannabe investment bankers to suddenly have a light bulb moment.
They're
like
not very
yourself.
good miners.
Whenever we have a gold miner up here on stage, it's always a popular question. What is your view long-term of the gold price?
And
Have you got a view on that?
And every time, Tim, you've had that question,
Yeah,
the gold
I
miner
don't,
has said
so I
it's
haven't got a
going
good
higher.
answer.
So I'm going to say
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah.
It's going higher. Of course,
Yeah.
it's going higher.
Yeah.
I think there's some validity at the moment to saying that the latest upturn in gold price has been central bank buying, non-Western aligned central bank buying, that has maybe created a demand that wasn't there. As again, China has said for a long time that it doesn't want the US dollar to be the reserve currency forever. So gold cannot replace that, but don't take what China says as just something they don't mean.
Yep.
So they are working on trying to broaden their exposure, because at the moment they're the biggest debtor nation to the US, and the US debt is a massive problem, which no one wants to solve in the US. So there are good reasons why the gold price is going up. From an evolution perspective, I think our mantra is we don't have any control over the gold price. We have control over it safely delivering our production, and that is what we're focused on.
I think we might have time for one more. That's definitely a one from Cass. You acquired Red Lake, your asset in Canada, what, last year?
No, 4 years ago.
4 years ago. What have you noticed in terms of operating there compared to Australia? I mean, we see them often as a like-minded sort of country. How do we compare to them as far as operating an asset?
Well, Red Lake hasn't been our finest moment yet. It's been a really challenging acquisition. We were probably too optimistic. We bought it just when COVID started and couldn't go and visit it really for 18 months. And we're too optimistic about how like-minded we were going to be. So there are differences in culture. There are different styles of communication, and it's taken us probably 4 years to understand how to speak Canadian better.
You're getting there.
Getting there.
We are out of time. Thank you so much for all of your questions that you've submitted through Slido. Would you please thank our guest speaker this afternoon, Jake Klein. You've certainly thrown a few pretty heavy thought bubbles into the office, into the room rather. Danny Tarmady's going to come up and give a more official vote of thanks. I'll get you to stick around. Thanks, Danny. Oh, we're getting the lectern back up. So I'm going to see if we've got another question that's flying up the list here. Question here about evolution adding value to its to your copper, to its mined copper. Anything you can enlighten us with on that one?
Mic's gone off.
The mic's gone off. You're back on.
Is it back on?
Yep.
We like copper.
Yep.
We like it for a number of reasons. I mean, the supply and demand rationale is impressive, and it is a metal that is needed for the energy transition. There isn't a lot of it. A lot of the South American mines, which have been the baseline production, are mature. They're also big bulk mines generally with lots of tonnage. They can be mined efficiently, so we really like them. They're just hard to find. We made an acquisition of North Parkes in December. We've bought now 100% of Ernest Henry over the last, really, in 2016 and 2021. So if anyone has a great copper mine that they want to sell cheaply, come and see me, please.
And final question from the audience. I'm putting you on the spot here. Net zero by 2050. Achievable? Yes or no?
No chance.
Okay. Thank you, Jake. Danny.
Thanks, Tim. Thank you, Jake. Some notes that I took away from Jake's presentation. Mining has made all Australians prosperous, and I think everybody in this room will agree with that. What were our parents thinking, and why didn't they wake up when they had the opportunity? The inconvenient truths of globalisation is over and decoupled, and we're now long-term competition with China. Our resources won't last forever, and the price tag will increase, and we need to be globally competitive and continue to be a great place to mine. And we need to have mature conversations around green power, which you just mentioned, Tim. And I'm thrilled to hear about your graduate program and the fact that you're increasing participation of women within Evolution, and that you're a people-orientated business. And we need to continue showcasing how amazing our industry is now and into the future. So we're glad that you're the biggest accidental miner, and thank you, Jake, for your presentation today.
Thank you, Jake.